They always say a company doesn't collapse in a single moment. It bleeds out slowly, behind glass walls and expensive suits. But that morning, in the top floor boardroom of Victory Systems, I watched the bleeding turn into freefall. The lights were too bright, bleaching the skin off every face around the table. No one touched the catered breakfast, and the smell of burnt coffee lingered like smoke after a fire. Damien Holt, the new COO, sat at the head of the table in a suit so sharp it could have drawn blood. But the swagger he'd paraded through the building 3 months ago was gone. His jaw twitched. His eyes darted like a man searching for an exit that didn't exist. On the long glass table lay a single sheet of paper, printed and grainy, like evidence in a police file. My picture, my name, and scrawled in red marker across my face, "Do not let her back." No one wanted to touch it. No one wanted to look too long either. But the image had already burned into every mind in the room. It wasn't just a piece of paper. It was proof. Proof that they'd crossed the line. And that line was now strangling them. Before we go any further, take a break and blink slowly. Trust me, your eyes will thank you. By the way, where are you watching from? I love seeing these little communities come together. If you enjoyed this story, please hit the like button and subscribe. It's the easiest way to get more great stories. Carl Maddox, lead investor, leaned forward with eyes like razors. His voice was low, but cut through the silence, sharper than any gavel. Who authorized her termination without a transition plan? The words hit the table like gunshots. The CFO paled, his hands trembling against his notepad. The general counsel dropped her gaze to her shoes. No one moved. No one breathed. I sat back in the shadows, not physically in the room, but close enough to feel the tension leak through the walls. A friend had slipped me the live feed from the security camera. It was grainy, black and white, perfect for the kind of moment noir stories are built on. Damien tried to find his footing. "It was a group decision," he stammered, "based on performance metrics and strategic realignment." Carl lifted one hand, and the room froze. "No more buzzwords. You didn't fire a developer. You cut out a compliance artery, and now the merger is dead. $350 million. Gone." The words hung there like smoke that wouldn't clear. That was the beauty of it. They thought they'd erased me with a manila envelope and a security escort. They thought I'd fade into silence. Just another expendable employee swallowed by corporate amnesia. What they didn't realize was that I had been the keystone. You pull the stone, the arch collapses, and now, every executive in that room was watching the collapse in real time. I didn't smile as I watched them unravel. This wasn't triumph. This wasn't revenge. It was physics. You build a house on a rotten foundation. It caves. And they were finally hearing the timbers snap. The boardroom went silent again, except for the faint click of Carl's pen. No one had an answer. No one ever would. They weren't wrong about one thing. I was invisible. That was my strength. While the execs strutted through the halls of Victoria Systems, polishing their resumes and chasing headlines, I lived in the shadows of their ambition. 12 years in that building, and most people barely knew my name. But every wire, every bridge, every fragile stitch that held our systems together carried my fingerprint. I wasn't flashy. I didn't belong to the rooftop happy hours, the office trivia nights, or the Slack channels buzzing with memes at 2 a.m. My job was quieter, harder. When a compliance trigger stalled at midnight on Christmas Eve, it was me alone in the server room with a thermos of stale coffee, fingers cold against the keyboard, piecing together the architecture like a surgeon with no anesthesia. I never asked for applause. All I wanted was stability, clean systems, clear documentation, and the quiet dignity of work that mattered, even if no one admitted it. Victoris didn't see it that way. To them, I was background noise, a line item on payroll, the one who would always pick up the slack, because that's what I'd always done. They handed me the hardest clearances, the 6-month trainings, the psych evaluations no one else wanted to endure. I became the liaison to Northbridge Technologies, the only one certified to sign off on the integration protocols. The papers carried my name, Erica Lewis, third-party neutral clearance authority. Most of them never even bothered to read it. But I knew what it meant. Without me, the bridge didn't exist. Funny thing about bridges, people walk across them every day, never noticing the steel and bolts holding it all up. Until one day, a single beam cracks. Then, everyone remembers who built it. Still, I didn't resent the silence. In fact, I thrived in it. Being invisible gave me freedom, while the loud ones tripped over buzzwords and postured for investors. I quietly built the foundation beneath their feet, and I always kept a folder marked contingency. Not because I was paranoid, because I was practical. You spend enough time watching executives cut corners. You learn to prepare for the moment they decide you're expendable. That moment came faster than I expected. The atmosphere shifted the day Damian Holt arrived. He wasn't like the old guard, the grizzled CTOs who understood legacy code because they'd broken it themselves. Damian came in with expensive suits, perfect hair, and the kind of grin that belonged on a billboard. He didn't see people, he saw obstacles. He didn't talk about systems, he talked about synergies. His speeches oozed with words like agility, modernization, and disruption, as if jargon alone could rewire a network. I watched him from my corner desk, 3 monitors glowing in front of me, the hum of the servers in my ears like an old, familiar song. He spoke for 42 minutes in the auditorium that day. People clapped like he'd parted the Red Sea. I just sipped my burnt coffee and fixed a broken data bridge no one else even realized was failing. That was the truth about me. I didn't need the spotlight. But they had forgotten something vital. When the lights go out, it's not the speech you remember. It's the bridge that either holds or collapses. And I was the only one left holding it. The first time I saw Damian Holt up close, I knew the clock had started ticking. He didn't walk into Victori's like a man joining a company. He walked in like he'd just bought the place at a clearance sale. His shoes were polished to a mirror shine. His tie knotted like a noose pulled tight. And his voice carried the cadence of a salesman who'd never actually fixed anything in his life. He was the kind of man who thought confidence could bend reality. And for a while, people let him believe it. At the town hall, he spoke for 42 minutes without saying a single thing worth remembering. Agility. Legacy rot. Cultural reset. His words bounced off the glass walls like rubber bullets. Employees around me leaned forward, clapped at all the right beats, nodding as if enlightenment had just descended on the 34th floor. I stayed in my corner seat, hands wrapped around a chipped mug of coffee that smelled more like ash than beans, fixing an integration bug no one else even knew existed. That was the difference between us. He was the stage. I was the wiring in the walls, the current humming underneath. And he had no idea how much of his stage depended on me. Still, I could feel it, the shift in the air. When men like Damian arrive, they don't just bring change, they bring a purge. They don't ask who's been keeping the lights on for a decade. They look at the payroll, circle a few names, and call it progress. It didn't take long, 3 weeks, maybe 4. Before HR came knocking, not with a smile this time, not with the casual, "Hey, Erica, quick question." No, it was Marissa Cole, Victoris's HR director, with 2 shadows behind her, a young man with a clipboard and another with eyes as flat as winter pavement. "Erica," Marissa said softly. Too softly. "Can we speak privately?" That's corporate language for bend over. They led me down the hall to a side room that smelled faintly of old carpet and disinfectant. The blinds were drawn. The chairs were too small. On the table sat a manila envelope like a sealed verdict. Marissa slid it toward me with 2 fingers. "It's a realignment," she said. "Nothing personal, nothing personal." I pulled out the letter, half buzzwords, half excuses. My role no longer aligned with the company's strategic vision. Effective immediately. Return badge and laptop before 3 South p.m. Security had already been notified. I read it twice. Not because I didn't understand, but because I wanted to be sure they'd written it with such clean detachment. 12 years, erased in 12 sentences. When I looked up, the clipboard kid avoided my eyes. The other one just stared, bored, like he was waiting for the next execution. That's when I noticed the photo. On the front desk, near the potted plant no one watered, was a grainy printout of my face. In red marker, "Do not let her back." I felt it hit harder than the letter. That was no bureaucratic slip. That was personal, for a moment. I thought my hands might shake, but they didn't. My heart pounded, my palms were cold, yet my body stayed steady. They were expecting drama, a scene, maybe even tears. That's the gift they always hope for, the spectacle of breaking someone down. I didn't give it to them. I folded the letter, slid it back into the envelope, and stood. My voice didn't crack when I said, "Understood." I walked out, each step echoing against the polished tile like a slow metronome. People watched from their desks, pretending not to, their eyes flitting away as if humiliation might be contagious. At my desk, Ethan Price, my assistant, too green to know how rotten this place had become, looked up at me with wide eyes. He mouthed, "I'm sorry." I gave him half a smile and handed him my badge. No speech, no anger, just a soft click of plastic on wood. The door had closed, but in the silence that followed, I already knew I was the one who locked it from the other side. Humiliation has a way of clinging to you like smoke. You don't smell it right away, but everyone else does. That photo with the red scrawl across my face stayed burned in my vision long after I left the HR room. Do not let her back. Not a directive. Not even a precaution. A warning. As if I were radioactive. As if 12 years of holding their systems together had turned me into a threat the moment I stopped being useful. I walked back to my desk with that image trailing me like a shadow. My coworkers had suddenly developed a deep fascination with their monitors, typing nonsense to avoid meeting my eyes. The sound of keyboards clattering filled the silence like nervous laughter. No one wanted to be caught looking at me, but I felt their glances flicker, curious, guilty, relieved it wasn't them. The cardboard box was waiting. They always seemed to have one ready, like the fire extinguisher in the hall. Break glass in case of termination. I packed my things without ceremony. A chipped mug with "World's Okayest Engineer" printed in faded letters. A notebook filled with margin notes no one else could decipher. A tin of peppermints I kept for the nights when the coffee ran out and the servers still demanded blood. None of it mattered now. But it was mine. Ethan stood at the edge of my desk, awkward in his too big shirt, eyes damp. "You don't deserve this," he whispered. "No one ever does," I answered, sliding the box shut. My voice was steady, colder than I meant it to be. But maybe that was good. Heat would have given them satisfaction. Cold meant control. The walk out was longer than usual. Funny how a hallway you've walked 1,000 times can feel like a mile when every step is your last. At the security gate, I handed over my badge. The guard avoided my eyes, pressing the release button without a word. The badge clicked into the tray. Final and absolute. Outside. The air was damp, heavy with the smell of rain against concrete. Chicago traffic growled in the distance, taxis honking like impatient vultures. I set the box in the passenger seat of my car and slid behind the wheel. For a moment, I just sat there, staring at my hands on the steering wheel. They weren't shaking. They should have been. But they weren't. That's when I realized something. Humiliation cuts deep, but underneath it, something sharper was forming. Not rage, not grief, precision. I pulled out my phone, unlocked the secure vault app I had built for situations exactly like this. Most people create contingency plans for the company. I created mine for survival. My clearance keys sat in neat rows of encrypted entries, each tied to the Northbridge integration protocols. Without those keys, the handshake between systems couldn't complete. Without me, the merger was dead weight. One by one, I reviewed the entries. Then I hovered over the most critical certificate, my personal clearance authority. It had been stamped into every audit log, every compliance trigger, every federal verification tied to the $350 million deal. I tapped once, paused, then deleted it. The screen confirmed. Entry removed. Propagating to registry. Irrevocable. There it was. Quiet, clean. No fireworks, no alarms. Just a silent cut in the artery. I leaned back in the seat, the hum of the city filling the silence. They thought the photo in red was a victory, a final humiliation. What they didn't realize was that humiliation doesn't end a story. It ignites one. By the time I pulled out into the street, I wasn't thinking about the cardboard box, or the badge, or even the faces I'd left behind. I was thinking about bridges, and what happens when the people who walk across them every day forget who built them. Humiliation fades, but precision stays. By the time I steered through the wheat streets and pulled into my driveway, I wasn't thinking about Vectoris's glass tower anymore. I was thinking about locks, and the keys that open them, and more importantly, the one I had just destroyed. The house was too quiet when I stepped inside. No pings, no late-night requests disguised as quick favors. Just the ticking of a wall clock and the low hum of the fridge. I set the cardboard box on the kitchen table. The artifacts of 12 years staring back at me like evidence bags after a crime scene. The mug, the notebook, the tin of peppermints. They looked small, almost absurd, compared to what I had carried in my head all this time. I didn't take off my coat. Instead, I walked straight to the hallway closet, past the winter coats. Behind the printer I'd promised to fix 2 years ago sat a black fireproof box with 2 padlocks. I pulled it out, set it on the floor, and twisted both locks until they clicked open. Inside were folders labeled in my neat handwriting. Legal, protocols, clearance, red flag. I flipped to the thickest one. Contingency. Most people in that building thought compliance was just paperwork. Checklists, signatures, initials in the margins. They never understood that those documents were the skeleton of the entire deal. Strip away the signatures, and the body collapses. And buried in those pages was the one bone they could never replace. Clause 9C. I'd highlighted it years ago, back when the first whispers of the merger began. Termination of named liaison without formal substitution and recertification voids, compliance status, and suspends the legal standing of acquisition protocol. In plain English, fire me without replacing me properly, and the deal becomes a $350 million paperweight. I ran my finger along the sentence, the ink bleeding slightly from where I'd circled it in red months ago. My name appeared on every page as the neutral clearance authority. Not a placeholder, not an optional sign-off. A requirement. They never asked about it. They never even noticed. Executives don't read the fine print. They just assume someone like me will always be there to carry the weight. Well, not this time. I set the folder on the table beside the box from the office. 2 pieces of my life, side by side, the scraps they'd tossed aside, and the fuse they'd unknowingly handed me. The irony was almost too sharp to swallow, but I didn't laugh. This wasn't comedy, it was mechanics. You remove the keystone. The arch collapses. Basic physics, dressed up in legalese. I opened my old laptop, the one I kept disconnected from Vectoris's network, and slid in a drive with my backups. Logs, registries, handshake protocols, all the quiet architecture that kept the merger alive. The screen flickered as I verified what I already knew. The deletion I'd executed from my phone earlier had propagated to the Federal Registry. The clearance authority entry was gone. Irrevocable. Without it, the system couldn't authenticate the final handshake between Vectoris and Northbridge. Without it, no escrow would release, no signatures would validate, no funds would move. They were holding a live grenade without the pin, and they didn't even know it yet. I closed the laptop and leaned back in my chair. The house was still silent, but I could already hear the future noise: phones ringing off hooks, lawyers shouting in boardrooms, investors demanding answers. And through it all, the one fact no one could erase: they'd done this to themselves. Humiliation had been their intention, erasure had been their goal. But by crossing that line, they'd handed me leverage stronger than any speech, any negotiation, any contract. I poured myself a glass of whiskey, the ice clinking like a countdown. Clause 9C wasn't revenge. It wasn't sabotage. It was the law, hiding in plain sight, waiting for the day someone was arrogant enough to ignore it. And that day had finally come. What do you think happens next? Does Erica explode and bring the whole tower down? Or does Damien make one last desperate move to save himself? Drop your prediction in the comments. I love seeing how you think this ends. And stay with me until the very last scene. The finish will be worth it. The thing about traps is they don't need to spring loudly to work. Sometimes the quietest snap does the most damage. By the next morning, I was ready to pull the cord. The sun barely cleared the Chicago skyline when I sat at my dining table. The contingency folder opened beside an untouched bowl of cereal. The air outside was gray, the kind of light that made the whole city look like it had been dipped in smoke. I had everything I needed spread in front of me: federal documentation, protocol logs, my name stamped across every line like a watermark they couldn't wash out. It was time to let someone else in on the secret. I dialed the number from memory: Northbridge Technologies Compliance Office. Caroline Shaw picked up on the second ring, her voice too chipper for a woman standing on the edge of a $350 million pit. Northbridge Compliance, this is Caroline. Caroline, I said, calm, steady. This is Erica Lewis. A pause. Papers shuffled on her end. The faint click of a mouse. Oh, Erica. Perfect timing. We were just reviewing your final clearance. Are you calling to confirm sign-off? Not exactly, I said. I thought you should know. I was terminated yesterday. The silence that followed wasn't silence at all. It was the air leaving the room, the foundation cracking beneath her feet. Terminated? She whispered. Effective immediately. Badge revoked. Systems access disabled. Victoris no longer employs me. I could hear her flipping through documents, searching for a line that might save her from what she already knew. But you're the named liaison. Your clearance ID is hardwired into the acquisition binder, the federal database. That's correct. My tone didn't waver. Clause 9C is in effect. The pause stretched so long I could almost hear her heart pounding through the phone. Finally, she spoke, voice tight. That means the compliance chain is broken. That means, I said, leaning back in my chair, your deal is suspended until Victoris names and certifies a new liaison, which, as you know, is a process that takes months, if it's even possible. She exhaled sharply. The sound of someone realizing the bridge under her had just turned to dust. We'll need formal notice, she said quickly. A statement from you, something in writing. My attorney is preparing it now, I replied. You'll have it before end of day. I hung up without flourish. No dramatics. Just a scalpel slice through the spinal cord of their acquisition timeline. For a moment. I sat in the silence of my kitchen, watching the sunlight creep across the blinds. Somewhere in Manhattan, Northbridge's executives would already be huddling in glass rooms, phones buzzing, lawyers scrambling, and back at Victoris. The storm was about to break. I powered up the laptop again, checking the Federal Liaison Registry. My name still sat there. No substitution filed, no recertification, without me. The merger was nothing more than paper. The first message came 20 minutes later. A voicemail from Victoris's CFO. His voice was pitched too high, like a balloon ready to pop. Erica, Hi, we're having a small hiccup with the compliance chain. Nothing major, just a miscommunication. Can we connect briefly? I played it twice, then deleted it. A hiccup. He called it. More like a lung collapse. By noon, the emails started. Northbridge had officially frozen all pending signatures. Escrow funds paused. Outbound transfers locked. The language was clinical, but the meaning was fatal. The $350 million deal was now in limbo, dangling by a single clause. I poured myself another coffee, the bitter taste grounding me. This wasn't revenge. This wasn't sabotage. This was the system working exactly as designed. They'd cut me out. And in doing so, they'd cut themselves open. The trap was set. The first spring had snapped, and for the first time in 12 years. I wasn't the one scrambling to hold the pieces together. I was the one watching them fall apart. Chaos doesn't start with screaming. It starts with whispers. By the time the sun dipped low over Chicago, those whispers had already started crawling through the corridors of Vectori's systems. Clause 9C, 3 characters and a number, a line buried deep in legalese. But inside the building, it carried the weight of a ticking bomb. I didn't need to be there to know how it spread. A junior analyst in legal stumbled across the protocol draft I'd uploaded months ago. He passed it to a colleague, who slipped it into a Slack channel with the caption, "Is this real?" Within an hour. The screenshot was bouncing between departments like contraband. By mid-afternoon, it was all anyone could talk about, quietly, nervously, as if saying the words too loud might set it off. Ethan was the first to reach out. My phone buzzed with his text. "They're panicking. People keep mentioning Clause 9C. What did you do?" I let the message sit on the screen, the words glowing in the dim light of my kitchen. Then I typed back. "Just 2 lines. Check the binder. You'll see for yourself." A pause. Then, "Holy hell! This is insane." I didn't reply. Some lessons have to be learned in silence. Back at Vectoris, the boardroom had turned into a bunker. Damian Holt clicked his pen like a man trying to conjure magic out of plastic. The CFO's collar was damp with sweat. Lawyers clashed over definitions. Compliance officers tore through old files. And still the fact remained. My name was the only one that mattered. Phones rang nonstop. The kind of shrill corporate alarms executives can't silence. Northbridge wasn't answering calls anymore, just sending curt emails with words like suspended and irregularities. Investors were growing restless, their questions sharper, their patience shorter. I imagined Damien standing at the head of the table. His billboard grin finally cracked. He would be trying to project control, repeating phrases like internal misalignment and temporary obstacle. But no one was buying it. Not anymore. Meanwhile, I sat at my own table, 3 states of calm ahead of them, coffee in hand, city lights flickering against the window. I watched the storm unfold from a distance. For 12 years, I'd been the one patching leaks, working nights, making sure no one ever saw how fragile the system really was. Now, for once, I wasn't holding it together. I was letting it fall apart. Ethan texted again later that night. They're blaming each other. Damien says it's a credentialing bug. Legal says it's HR's fault. People are freaking out. I've never seen anything like this. I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. He was still green. Too young to understand that corporations aren't built on loyalty or merit. They're built on pressure, on fear, on the illusion that everyone is replaceable. Until one day, someone isn't. I sent him one emoji, just a lock, no explanation. Let him interpret it however he wanted. He didn't text again. That's how echoes work. They start as whispers, grow into rumors, and finally crash down like thunder no one can ignore. Clause 9C was no longer a line in a document. It was a specter haunting every hallway, every inbox, every sleepless executive staring at the ceiling at 3 a.m. And me, I wasn't the ghost. I was the one who set the haunting in motion. Panic doesn't arrive like a thunderclap. It seeps in, slow at first, then drowns everything. By Monday morning, Vectori's systems was underwater. I could almost hear it from my kitchen in Chicago, the muffled roar of a company gasping for air. Phones rang down 3 different chains of command. Emails stacked faster than anyone could answer. Executives shuffled between conference rooms like trapped animals, clutching binders they hadn't read until that week. And at the center of it all, Damian Holt, still clinging to his Sharpie like it was a magic wand that might write him out of disaster. The emergency all-hands was scheduled for 9:30 a.m. in Conference Room Alpha. The name sounded grand, but inside it looked like a pressure cooker. 30 executives crammed into a glass box, their reflections bouncing off the walls like ghosts. The air smelled of stress, sour sweat, burnt coffee, paper heated too long under fluorescent lights. Damien opened the meeting with the same charm he'd been peddling since he walked into Vectori's. But it cracked at the edges. "We're facing a minor compliance irregularity," he began. "Temporary, contained. We'll have it resolved internally within 72 hours. His voice carried, but his hands betrayed him, nervous, twitching against the pen. The CFO didn't buy it. He slammed a folder on the table so hard the papers fanned out like shrapnel. "Minor?" Northbridge froze escrow. They halted every signature. "We're burning credibility by the hour." His voice was hoarse, the sound of a man choking on the market's cold hand around his throat. Damien smiled thinly, a crack of white teeth under fluorescent glare. "These legacy systems always produce friction. That's why I was brought in, to modernize, to steady the ship." But no one was steadying anything. A junior compliance officer whispered to her colleague, "Too loud, Clause 9C. The words rippled across the room like gasoline meeting a match. Everyone froze. Everyone knew. Clause 9C wasn't a bug. It wasn't friction. It was law. And it was lethal. By noon, investors had joined the calls, their voices cold, detached, sharpened by the billions they had riding on Vectoris's shoulders. Carl Maddox, lead investor, spoke like a hammer on glass. "Who authorized the termination of Erica Lewis without a certified replacement?" Dead silence. Damien tried to pivot. "We had consensus. HR determined redundancy. Performance metrics indicated—" "Cut the jargon," Carl snapped. "This isn't a pitch deck. This is a collapse." Across the table, Marissa Cole from HR shrank into her seat. She'd signed the paperwork, slid the envelope across the table like it was nothing. Now the ink from that moment was spreading like blood. The general counsel broke the silence. "Without Lewis's clearance, the deal is void, legally, structurally. We can't push it through. Northbridge won't accept interim substitutions." Voices rose, chairs scraped. Someone muttered about shareholder lawsuits. Another mentioned SEC inquiries. The room boiled with heat, everyone pointing fingers. No one holding answers. Damien raised his voice above the din, but the cracks had widened. "Listen to me," he barked. "This is temporary. We'll get her back. Everyone has a price." The words hung in the air, heavy, desperate. They didn't know I was listening, not directly, but through the voices spilling into the world. Ethan's texts came in staccato bursts. "They're melting down. Damien says they'll buy you back. Investors want blood. People are terrified." I didn't answer. I just leaned back in my chair. City lights flickering against the window, the hum of the refrigerator filling the silence. For once, the panic wasn't mine to carry. Inside Conference Room Alpha, the meeting dragged on like a trial without a judge. Every executive was both defendant and accuser, circling Damien, circling Marissa, circling themselves. And through it all, that paper with my name, "Do not let her back," hovered like a ghost in the middle of the table. Proof, evidence, the kind that doesn't vanish when you shred it. By the time they broke for air, the building no longer smelled of power. It smelled of fear. And fear, once it sets in, never really leaves. Desperation doesn't walk through the front door. It slips under it, quiet as smoke, until the whole room chokes on it. By Tuesday afternoon, Vectoris Systems was suffocating. I knew it before the courier even showed up at my building. The calls I didn't take. The messages I didn't answer. They told me enough. CFOs don't call 3 times in a row unless the walls are closing in. Lawyers don't leave voicemails unless they're bleeding. By the time the Lexus rolled up in front of my apartment, I could already taste the panic in the air. The man in the blazer was exactly what I expected. Clean haircut, leather briefcase, an expression like he'd been sent into enemy territory without a map. He didn't linger, just walked up the path, slipped a manila envelope through my mail slot, and left like he was afraid of catching something. I didn't touch the envelope right away. I let it sit on the floor while I poured myself a drink, bourbon over ice, the kind of ritual that slows your hands when the rest of the world is speeding up. The cube cracked under the pour, sharp and brittle, like the sound of Vectoris coming apart. Only after the glass was half empty did I pick it up. Inside, an offer letter. Double salary. New title, Director of Global Compliance, complete with authority they'd never given me in 12 years. Stock options, vesting immediately. An apology wrapped in corporate euphemisms. On the last page, Damien's signature. His handwriting was the kind of scrawl a man uses when his world is burning, and he's hoping ink can douse flames. I leaned back in my chair, paper dangling from my hand. They thought this was about money, about titles, about recognition long overdue. They thought I was waiting for them to finally see me. They never understood. 12 years I gave them. 12 years of patching holes in their leaky vessel while the captains drank champagne on the upper deck. Birthdays missed, anniversaries ignored. I kept them alive, quiet, invisible, while they built their empires on my silence, and when they decided I was expendable, they wrote it in red across my picture. Do not let her back. Now here they were, begging for the same woman they'd cast out. I called Daniel, my lawyer. He didn't waste words. Want me to answer for you? Yes, I said. Keep it clean. He chuckled, low and dry. Clean can still cut. The response went out that evening, sharp as a scalpel. Miss Lewis appreciates your revised offer. However, she no longer holds employee status at Vectoris Systems. Should your organization wish to re-engage her expertise, Quiet Seal LLC is available for limited licensing of relevant services. Market rates apply. Retainer required. Engagement subject to availability. No anger, no theatrics. Just facts. The kind you can't argue with. By morning, someone inside HR had leaked it. The staff thread titled Emergency Staffing Update was suddenly circulating screenshots of Daniel's letter. I didn't need to imagine the reaction. Ethan texted me a play-by-play. People are losing their minds. Someone said you turned Vectoris into a toll road. Damien looks like he hasn't slept in 2 days. I smirked into my coffee, not because I wanted applause, not because revenge tasted sweet, but because silence, finally, was mine. By noon, the narrative inside the company had flipped. The same people who wouldn't meet my eyes in the hallway were whispering my name like it was a legend. The ghost from compliance. The one who pulled the pin without raising her voice. Employees started to imagine me not as the quiet woman in the corner cubicle, but as the architect who could collapse, or save, their futures with a single keystroke. And still, Vectoris kept coming. Another courier by Wednesday, another envelope. This time the letterhead was bolder, the numbers bigger. Triple salary, expanded stock, promises dripping from every paragraph. I didn't open it. I didn't need to, because by then, Quiet Seal LLC wasn't just a name I filed online. It was breathing. Contracts were waiting in my inbox, 2 from startups who wanted infrastructure reviews, 1 from a competitor of Vectoris asking for a consultation. I hadn't even pitched myself. The world had seen the headlines, smelled the blood, and knew who to call. Vectoris thought they were buying back an employee. What they didn't realize was that I'd already become something else. Not a cog, not a ghost, an entity, a firewall with a signature they couldn't replicate. I set Damien's letter back into the envelope and slid it into a drawer. No need to shred it, no need to frame it. Just a reminder of the moment the balance shifted. Outside, the city hummed like it always did. Cars honking, trains grinding, lights flickering against the skyline. But for the first time in 12 years, the noise didn't feel like a backdrop to someone else's story. It felt like the soundtrack to mine. And as for Victoris, well, they hadn't hit the bottom yet. They were still falling. Some collapses happen in silence, like a fuse burning out. Others echo loud enough to rattle the whole city. By Thursday morning, Victoris's fall was rattling every corner of Chicago's financial district. The first blow came at dawn. A financial blog posted a blind item. Unnamed Midwest tech firm loses key compliance asset mid-merger. Deal in limbo, $350 million at risk. They didn't name Victoris, but anyone who'd been paying attention didn't need the name spelled out. The markets sniff weakness the way vultures scent decay. By 8 o'clock, the company's stock ticker was bleeding red. By 9, reporters were circling the building like sharks around a sinking ship, and inside those mirrored glass walls, Damien Holt was trying to plug holes with words. The board convened an emergency session. No croissants, no talking points, no rehearsed smiles, just red eyes, shaking hands, and the kind of silence that only comes when people realize the ground beneath them is no longer solid. Damien walked into the room in his expensive suit, but the swagger was gone. His hair was slicked too neat, his tie knotted too tight, as if he thought polish might disguise desperation. He started with a line he'd probably rehearsed in the elevator. "We are facing temporary headwinds. Our focus is on restoring confidence and ensuring stability." But the lead investor, Carl Maddox, wasn't in the mood for performance. He leaned forward, his voice gravel and steel. "Stop dressing it up. Northbridge has already pulled out of escrow. Macrovia isn't returning calls. And the press has the story. What the hell are you doing here if you can't even control your own house?" The CFO tried to soften it, shifting blame toward HR. Compliance. Anywhere but himself. But the general counsel cut through the noise. She slid a document across the table like it was a weapon. Clause 9C. It's not a rumor. It's binding. Without Erica Lewis's certification, the deal is void. There is no workaround. There is no interim authorization. It's over. The words hung heavy. Final. Damien bristled, his pen tapping against the table like a nervous tick. "We can negotiate. Everyone has a price. She'll come back." "Except she won't," Carl interrupted. He tossed a copy of Daniel's letter onto the glass table. My lawyer's clean words stared back at them like a verdict. Quiet Seal, LLC. Licensing only. Market rates. Retainer required. That was the moment the room shifted. The directors stopped looking at spreadsheets and started looking at Damien, not as a leader, but as the man who'd driven them into the ditch. Marissa Cole from HR looked ready to dissolve into her chair. The PR director muttered something about narrative management, but even she sounded like she didn't believe it. Someone mentioned shareholder lawsuits. Another whispered about federal scrutiny. The air thickened until every breath was heavy with blame. By noon, the press had moved past blind items. Headlines flashed across tickers. Victoris merger in jeopardy after compliance fallout. Analysts went live on cable networks, dissecting the collapse, using phrases like governance failure and catastrophic oversight. The vultures weren't circling anymore. They were feeding. And me? I sat in my apartment, blinds half closed, watching it unfold on a muted television. The anchors speculated. The commentators shook their heads. The numbers slid down the screen like rain on glass. I sipped black coffee. Steady. Detached. For 12 years, I'd been the unseen bridge holding their world together. Now I was the absence no one could fill. Damien's voice cracked during the investor call that afternoon. Ethan texted me the transcript, line by line. He tried to blame legacy systems. He said you were replaceable. Then he left mid-sentence. His mic stayed hot. Everyone heard him curse. That was the sound of a man unraveling. The board didn't need a vote to know what came next. By the end of the day, rumors swirled that Damien's resignation was imminent. The once sharp face of Victoris, the man who thought synergy was a personality trait, was now the scapegoat standing at the gallows. I didn't cheer. I didn't gloat. Noir stories don't end with fireworks. They end with silence, with the slow realization that the damage was done long before the headlines hit. Victoris wasn't collapsing because of me. They collapsed because they believed the foundation was optional. I just let gravity do the rest. And gravity, as always, doesn't forgive. When corporations get desperate, they don't send flowers, they send couriers. Friday afternoon, the sky over Chicago hung low and gray, the kind of weather that makes the city feel like it's holding its breath. I was at my desk, reviewing a new contract for a client who actually valued my work, when the buzz of the intercom cut through the quiet. "Delivery!" the voice said. I checked the feed. Another suit. This one younger, nervous around the eyes, clutching a velvet box like it contained a beating heart. A gray sedan idled at the curb, the kind of car that screams corporate expense account. I didn't answer the intercom, didn't open the door, just watched him through the camera as he shifted his weight, rang again, and finally placed the box carefully on the mat. He lingered for a beat, glancing up at the lens as if hoping for some sign of humanity, then retreated to the sedan. The car pulled away. The street went quiet again. I let the box sit there. 10 minutes. 20. Long enough for the chill in the air to seep into the velvet. Only then did I open the door and bring it inside. No note on the outside. Just a gold seal I recognized instantly. Northbridge Group's executive crest. The people who'd once announced me as the Bridge in the merger paperwork. The same people who now watched that bridge burn. Inside the box was a handwritten note. Careful script on heavy paper. Next time they'll know who built the bridge. RM CEO, Northbridge Group. No offer, no plea, just acknowledgement. Recognition wrapped in silence. The kind of gesture that means more than money because it comes too late to be transactional. I set the note on my bookshelf, between the old merger binders and the Quiet Seal LLC charter. Not a trophy, not a threat, just a reminder. Hours later, another knock. This one louder, sharper. I didn't need the camera to know it wasn't a courier. It was Victoris making their final move. Damien didn't show. Of course, men like him never come themselves. Instead, they sent a middle-tier executive, the kind who still believed problems could be solved with polite smiles and the right envelope. He held it out with both hands, as if reverence could mask desperation. "Miss Lewis, this is our final offer. We're prepared to—" I cut the intercom feed. The envelope stayed wedged in the door until the wind knocked it loose. It tumbled into the gutter, soaking in the cold November rain. By morning, it was pulp, washed down the drain like every promise Victoris had ever made. That night, the phone calls started again. Unlisted numbers, anonymous voicemails, one voice sharp with anger, another wheedling with apology. By the third call, the CFO sounded almost broken, his words cracking as he begged me to reconsider. I poured another drink and let it ring. Because this wasn't about money, not anymore. It was about respect, something they could never buy, never fake, never rewrite with a new offer letter. They had crossed a line, drawn it themselves in red ink across my face. And some lines don't get erased. The following morning, news broke that Damien had stepped down. The press release was short, clinical, and full of euphemisms. But everyone knew he'd been shoved. Investors don't forgive billion-dollar blunders. And neither does the market. Victoris thought the last knock would bring me back. What they didn't understand was that there are doors you can't reopen once you've slammed them shut. I wasn't their employee anymore. I wasn't their bridge. I wasn't even their liability. I was something far worse. Proof. Proof that the quiet ones you dismiss are often the ones who hold the detonator. And proof, once written into history, doesn't answer the door. Some endings don't explode. They settle, quiet, deliberate, inevitable, like the last grain of sand falling in an hourglass. By the time Monday morning came, Vectoris Systems was no longer a company. It was a cautionary tale. Northbridge had pulled out. Macrovia had closed its files. Investors were circling other deals, unwilling to touch a house that couldn't even keep its own foundation intact. The headlines wrote themselves: merger collapses amid compliance scandal, Vectoris in freefall, a Keystone employee terminated, $350 lost. And me? I wasn't there to see the panic. I didn't need to be. I was sitting in my home office, blinds half open, watching the morning light spill across my desk. 3 monitors hummed in front of me, not Vectoris's, not tied to anyone's system but my own. The name at the top of each contract now read the same: Quiet Seal LLC. I hadn't chased clients. They had found me. Word travels fast when collapse makes the news. Smaller firms wanted infrastructure audits. Larger ones wanted compliance shielding. And one, ironically, was Vectoris itself. They'd filed an urgent request to license one of the old integrations I'd built years earlier, the very framework they'd once called obsolete. I quoted them 4 times the original rate. They didn't argue. The irony didn't taste sweet. It tasted exact. Precise. For 12 years, I had been invisible, the quiet hand stitching their world together while they paraded through town halls with buzzwords and smiles. And the moment they decided my name didn't matter, they proved exactly how much it did. Now, every dollar they paid to Quiet Seal carried a reminder. They hadn't fired a cog. They had exiled the architect. The velvet box from Northbridge still sat on my bookshelf. The handwritten note resting inside wasn't about money or contracts. It was about memory, recognition, a reminder that even in the cold machinery of corporate life, some people still know the truth. You can't burn a bridge without remembering who built it. I didn't need revenge. I didn't need their apologies. What I had was better. Control. For once. The noise of Slack notifications and midnight calls was gone. No more urgent pings that stretched into unpaid hours. No more birthdays sacrificed to patch their crumbling infrastructure. Just silence. A silence I had chosen. I poured a fresh cup of coffee and leaned back in my chair. Outside, the city moved as it always did. Horns, footsteps, neon signs blinking awake. But inside, the air felt steady, for the first time in years. I wasn't chasing someone else's fire. I was writing my own terms, because that's what this story was never about. Not the money, not the titles, not even the $350 million crater Vectoris left behind. It was about dignity, the kind no company can give you, and no termination letter can take away. I wasn't a ghost anymore. I was the consequence. And consequence, unlike loyalty, doesn't vanish when you're no longer on payroll. So maybe the real lesson is this. Sometimes the most powerful move isn't shouting, or fighting, or begging to be seen. Sometimes the strongest move is walking away and letting the silence do the work for you. What about you? Do you think Erica made the right call? Or should she have taken their offer? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I read everyone. And if this story kept you hooked, hit that like button, share it with a friend, and subscribe so you don't miss the next tale of power, betrayal, and quiet revenge.